MarkRogersTV, the voice of college football, checking out the betting lines for Week 13. We do it each and every week with Steve Merrill from Pro Sports Info. I encourage you to jump on over there. We're in the middle of the NFL and college football seasons. The NBA is in full swing, as well as college basketball. Steve, how you doing today?
Hey, Mark, doing well.
All right, let's jump into it for Week 13 again. And each and every week, you got to lock it in right here because we have Steve jump on with the three biggest games of the week and also give us a wild card selection as well. Ohio State and Penn State. This has decided the Big Ten Eastern Division and therefore basically the Big Ten for the past several seasons. This is how highly favored Ohio State is by Vegas. Penn State, a top 10 football team. I can't imagine, my goodness, and this has been a nail-biter for the last 3 seasons, and again has decided the Big Ten. Ohio State, Stephen, 18-point favorite at home against Penn State.
Yeah, and keep in mind, the odds makers try to get balanced action. So when you have an Ohio State team that started the season 9-0 straight up, but more importantly, 8-1 against the spread, you really have no choice but to start inflating the numbers. We saw that last week at Rutgers. They were a 51-point favorite. They only scored 56. They won the game by only 35. So that was only the second time all season that they didn't cover. Hard to take much away from that game, obviously, because it just didn't really matter how much they won by. But this is still a team that's 80% against the spread this year. And once again, at least based on my power rankings, even factoring in the blowout factors that they've had in these games against weaker teams, the line does look a little inflated here. My power rankings make Ohio State about a 17-point favorite in this game. The current line's 18.5. So there's a little bit of line value with Penn State. It's not necessarily enough to pull the trigger automatically, getting just 1 point there, but 17 and 18 are both somewhat key numbers. So I do think you're going to get some value with these big dogs going on, and you could definitely make a case for Penn State here. As you mentioned, top 10 caliber program, they're giving up just 13.5 points a game. So this is one of those situations we talked about a few times this year, and to be honest, they actually haven't cashed that well earlier in the season, but those were only 4 or 5 game samples. These teams have now played 10 games, and you're getting a good underdog that's getting more points overall than they allow in the season after 10 games. So you're definitely getting a defensive underdog here in Penn State. And keep in mind, Ohio State also has got a little bit of turmoil. They've got 12 guys listed as questionable this week. Penn State's got a couple receivers listed as questionable, but definitely look like a pretty healthy team overall.
Hey, Steve, when you mentioned the term blowout factor, I think is the term that you just used. Is that an actual metric you use, or is it just kind of common sense that Ohio State's a 40-point favorite? Once a game gets to that level, it doesn't really matter what the score is. They don't care if they win by 35 or 45, so it's difficult to determine. Is that what that is?
Yeah, you got to be very careful because with, power rankings, it's really the simplest breakdown of a power rating or a point spread is really margin of victory. And if you're to make a very simple power ranking, what you want to start with is margin of victory, and then you want to factor in strength of schedule because obviously, playing all Sun Belt teams and winning by 30 points a game is not the same as playing all Big Ten teams and winning by 30 points a game. So you do have to factor in a schedule strength with that margin of victory. But for the most part, that comes out to pretty close to what the point spread will be this point of the season. But where it does get tricky is a team like Ohio State that can just blow out the weaklings. So you do have to kind of have what I call diminishing returns at that point. And I also do separate power ratings when you play good teams. Now, Ohio State's played a handful of decent teams, but they really haven't played a powerhouse yet like Penn State. So this is a difficult game to handicap for that reason. But I do think that Ohio State's overvalued right now with that 8-2 point spread start. And I also think that they're going to have inflated lines the rest of the season. Now, with that said, I still have them as the best team in college football. I think they're fantastic. But I do think you'll probably start getting some value with these big underdogs. You just have to pick your spots. And obviously, Penn State, a very good team. You're probably comfortable picking a spot with them this week.
And, of course, the one game that could be maybe comparable or correlated to the Penn State game would be the Wisconsin win that Ohio State had, in which they only led 10-7 in the third quarter and then put on the gas and won it by 31 points against a Wisconsin team that's fairly comparable to Penn State. We got Steve Merrill on the line from ProSportsInfo.com. Also want to let you know that, of course, with Christmas coming, grab the link in the description section below and do your Amazon shopping right there, and you help us build the channel. Same shopping experience. All right, in the SEC, Georgia playing a second consecutive difficult opponent. They covered in beating Auburn 21-14 last week. They've got Texas A&M at home as a 13-point favorite, Steve.
Yeah, and you always worry about a letdown after a big win, but Georgia realizes with that bad loss against South Carolina as a 3-touchdown favorite back in early October that they can't afford to take their foot off the gas pedal. Not only do they have to win, but they probably have to start winning convincingly. Also, don't have to worry too much about the look-ahead rivalry game next week at Georgia Tech. That normally would be a spot you'd be concerned about. Georgia Tech is awful this year, switched into that pro-style offense. So this should be another focus spot for Georgia. Last week, I thought the line was too high. My power rankings made that Auburn game a pick-em. Georgia was a 3-point favorite. This week, I actually think the line surprisingly a little bit too low. My power rankings actually make this line 14. The current betting markets have it minus 13. It actually opened at 14 on Sunday and quickly came down to 13. So I do think there's actually a teeny bit of value now with Georgia below 2 touchdowns. A&M, a very good running team, very average throwing the ball, though. And if they get behind in this game, which I think they will, I'm not sure they're going to be able to catch up through the air against a really good Georgia defense that's given up only 10 points a game and only 5.5 yards per pass. So if Georgia gets out early, which I think they probably carry some of that momentum in from the Auburn win, I'm not sure Texas A&M is going to be able to catch up and play from behind.
The stakes get higher by the week in college football. We're at week 13, and of course, just 2 regular season weeks left toward a college football playoff appearance for all these teams gunning for that spot, or those 4 spots. We've got Baylor hosting Texas. Of course, we know what the Baylor Bears did last week. They looked so impressive in the first half and then blew a 25-point lead against Oklahoma at home, taking on a Texas team that is was vying for a Big 12 championship, or so we thought at the beginning of the season. They lost another game at Iowa State by 2 points. Texas is a 6-point dog at Baylor, Steve.
Yeah, I mean, worry a little bit about Texas mindset, but I think even at 6-3 last week, now 6-4, they realized they weren't really playing probably, for anything in the Big 12 anymore. So I think they'll come out, they'll play hard. I actually think they'll carry some of the momentum from that fourth quarter in which they outscored Iowa State 14-3 into this game. But the big concern here, of course, is Baylor's mindset. The first thing I did last week after that monumental collapse was check to see who Baylor was playing this week, because it's just a pure play against spot. You can throw the numbers out the window for the season. You have to handicap this game situationally, and it's really hard to trust Baylor. 31-10 lead at halftime as a 10-point home dog, and they don't score in the entire second half and still have a chance for overtime with, missed field goal. So you really have to worry about how that lingers. This is a team that nobody thought had national title hopes, but they win that game last week, which it looked like they were going to when they're up 31-10. Then they go into this one 10-0 straight up, and they are definitely in the mix. They realize now, even with just one loss, they're out of the mix. So I'd be very careful with Baylor this week. Surprisingly, the line has gone from 4 up to 6. The early money actually came in on Baylor. I think the odds makers were pricing it low on purpose because of the letdown spot. I think some early money that uses more power ratings pushed it up a bit, because I do think 6 is probably where it should be. But once again, all bets are off. You kind of throw the numbers out the window for the season, as Baylor, I can't imagine they're going to be fully focused for this game.
Get yourself on over to prosportsinfo.com. Join Steve and his betting edge and his product there on wagering for all the major sports. He's got everything listed right there. And of course, we're in the middle of the NFL, college football, and the NBA. Now, this is what I like to hear. The wild card selection of the week, Steve.
Yeah, we always say, the under-the-radar pick here, and this will definitely be an under-the-radar game. We're going to talk about Coastal Carolina, a team that wasn't even Division 1A a few years ago, against Louisiana Monroe. And I'm going to go look at the underdog, Coastal Carolina, +6 this Saturday. Both teams 4-6 on the season. I always like to play against bad favorites. Louisiana Monroe obviously qualifies, and Coastal's playing better down the stretch here. They beat Troy a few weeks ago, 36-35 as a 2-point dog. They've lost their last couple games, but they're still 3-1 against the spread their last 4, and they had a tough 1-point loss at Arkansas State last week as a 2-touchdown underdog. So I think that actually is a semi-victory. They did force 5 turnovers in that game. They had 3 on their own. That's the reason it was close, but they still played solid overall, ran the ball for 233 yards. I think they'll have plenty of success on the ground again against a bad Louisiana Monroe defense. It's given up 39 points a game this year. They're giving up 6.5 yards a play, and they're giving up over 250 rushing yards, almost 6 yards per carry on the ground. I will blindly play against any favorite in college football this late in the season that gives up nearly 6 yards per rush and is laying nearly a touchdown. So I think we're getting the better run defense in a game between two bad teams. Take Coastal Carolina +6.
There you have it. Week 13 betting lines, courtesy Steve Merrill, Pro Sports Info. Of course, everyone's playing across the FBS, so if you want to get more in-depth, certainly, and an edge on all the top 25 games and beyond, check out Steve's work at prosportsinfo.com. Steve, we appreciate it as always.
Thanks, Mark.